ESB, the Developer Productivity Release. My name is Bobby Kalagian, and I'm the Senior Product Marketing Coordinator for Neudesic, and the moderator for today's webinar. Today's webinar will be presented by Marty Woznicki, the General Manager of Neuron ESB. If you are properly logged in to GoToWebinar, you should see the title slide that says Neuron ESB 3.1, Application and Service Integration Platform for the Microsoft.NET Developer Productivity Release. If anyone is having problems, please exit and re-enter the webinar using the provided link. We'll start off with a few housekeeping items. All attendees will be set for mute for the duration of the presentation. Also, please make sure your phone or headset is muted to avoid any background noise. We strongly encourage participants to ask questions throughout the session by typing them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Please note that all questions will be held to the end, at which time Marty will answer them one by one. At this time, I'd like to introduce Marty Woznicki.
Well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. This presentation is really around our Developer Productivity Release 3.1. We just tossed that out there in the field about a couple of weeks ago, and we actually just released an update to it just a few days ago. So you can always download the latest. Really happy with this release. I thought we did a lot of great things from the usability perspective, especially making .NET developers far more productive. You know, our goal with Neuron ESB was really to, build a product for application and service integration that could really increase the productivity on the Microsoft.NET platform for .NET developers. Now, let me go forward. I think I am fully caffeinated, so this should go pretty well. A little bit about myself. I actually came from Microsoft. I've been doing this for a long, long time. Worked in Connected Systems Division with BizTalk, and anyhow, been doing a lot of the integration work for a very, very long time. Came to Neudesic in 2007 to literally build out Neuron ESB. You know, our vision with this product was really about delivering something very contrary to the industry, right? And that was how to actually make application and service integration easy for .NET developers, right? A lot of these products out there are hard to use, etc. Our goal is to build something easy to use. Now, for those folks that are very familiar with us, just bear with me for about 5 minutes while we actually get into the meat. This is just a slight overview of Neuron for those who might be joining who don't know much about us. Now, having said that, we've tried to deliver productivity on the .NET platform, optimizing development, but also reducing that total cost of ownership and integration for people. Now, how do we do that? We really try to build in agility, extensibility, ease of use, simplify a lot of things, eliminate the things that aren't necessary. You know, when you think about how .NET developers function today, many like to function in agile environments. Companies want agility because they want to be able to change things very quickly, change and adopt and adapt to their own customer demands. Extensibility is incredibly important. You know, if you look at a lot of products in this space, everybody claims extensibility, but what they fail to tell you is generally you need a PhD in their product to attain that extensibility. Our goal is to make extensibility, put it in reach of your everyday .NET developer. You know, these products tend to be horizontal in nature, right? That's why every industry tends to adopt these kind of products, and you build solutions on top of them. So extensibility, incredibly important. And our hallmark is really about ease of use, right? We want .NET guys to be able to go out, pick up this product, learn it in a few days, and be effective for their organization. And when we do that, there's a lot of benefits for organizations, right? Obviously, there's a plentiful pool of .NET developers out there. And if you can tap in that pool and use your existing resources, well, guess what? You're not having to outsource a lot of that application development anymore. You don't have to look for specialists in a schema editor or in a designer, right? You can actually just leverage your own resources. And in many cases, with Neuron, about 80% of our customers do all the work themselves. So I think we've been very successful in that regard. I think we're very unique in the industry in that regard. Most vendors out there are always trying to sell the integration server and $1 million of consulting along with it. That's really not us. When you can actually get those benefits, guess what? you start to reduce that total cost of integration, not just from a product SKU perspective, but also from having to outsource a lot of application development. And also, too, if you can simplify operations, even simplify the tool, what are you doing? You're really decreasing your operational costs over a 3- and 5-year period. I think Gartner and many others will argue that your operational cost is actually a much larger factor than even the outsourcing of the services cost. Hence, lots of customers today use Neuron, and they use Neuron specifically because, hey, they want their own folks to be able to use this software. They don't want the software to eventually sit as shelfware, because once consultants are gone, that tends to happen. They also tend to have very accelerated deployment schedules. Instead of deploying a project every 18 months, a lot of our customers, they like deploying in every 2 or 3 months, right? So again, having a tool that can accommodate that, really useful. So with 3.1, we're trying to accelerate that user experience, right? The ease of use, the agility, and always we're going to hit on scalability, performance, etc. In this release, usability and productivity were big, right? We wanted to make things easier to use. We wanted developers to be more productive. When we started looking out there and seeing what people were doing with our software, they were building more and more complex services and more complex processes. So now it's, well, how do I work with this at design time? When I'm developing a solution, how do I debug? How do I really accelerate that development process? It's interesting that integration, I think, has evolved, and services have evolved to the point where there's more and more complex processes being put in the middle to mediate these things. It's no longer really simple integration. But if you're going to do complex processing, you have to have an environment where developers, specifically .NET developers, can be more effective and can actually build these things faster and faster, and not just build them faster, but also build higher quality processes. So that's really big. So our themes are user experience, scalability, perf, some connectivity options that we put in there, and developer productivity, really big. So user experience. We looked at Neuron and just decided, hey, things need to be easier to use. We really pride ourselves on listening to our customers. We try to take that customer feedback and put it right on our product backlog. When I think about the user experience, right, number one, first thing I found, we really weren't scaling properly at 125. You'll find actually during this entire presentation, my desktop is set to 125% resolution, right, which is apparently the default with Windows. I think a lot of developers, myself included, we tend to always run at 100% because we want more real estate on the screen. Let's see here. WSDL configuration was a little confusing. We wanted to simplify that. We found more and more customers using longer naming conventions for our entities, whether they were topics, publishers, subscribers, but the UI itself didn't really accommodate that too well, right? Drop-down boxes, things of that nature. So we fixed a lot of those kind of things. Security configuration, was never happy with that, so we refactored all that. RabbitMQ management, again, we're always trying to refine that, so we did a little bit more refining there, as well as with auditing, right, being able to navigate. So let's see here. Some UIs here, some screenshots, but besides the screenshots, I think what we should do is probably just look at the product. So going in, let me go ahead and say, great, here's the UI. So again, I'm running at 125, and you can always see that if I go ahead and hit my desktop, personalize, you hit display, you have these options, smaller, medium, larger. Most developers, I think, run it smaller, but I think a lot more are starting to run it medium since Windows 7 and Windows 8, they're all shipping with medium as the default. Okay, so let's go back here. So now samples, some of these UIs didn't scale at all. All these things scale now. I'm connected online here. This is the Neuron ESB Explorer. Again, easy enough. A lot of the UIs have been changed so you can support long entity names, category names, even filtering on categories. If I wanted to put something longer in here, just like that, I can hit apply. And notice, guess what? This is going to expand appropriately, right? So as it should. Outstanding. Okay, so a lot of the UI we wanted to refactor. Let's see here. When it comes to entity names and even WSDL configuration. So WSDL configuration, tell you what, let me just go ahead and import in some WSDL from a service that's live. You know, Neuron, when it comes to service brokering, we host our own services, easy enough to do. But let me go in here and say, great, I want to import that in. I'll just go ahead and call this my payment service. Great, save that. Fantastic. I've got WSDL that's imported in. You'll actually see it in the repository, right? Payment WSDL, voila. And then on the connection side, say if I was going to virtualize this service, I could have something and say, you know what, let me go ahead and call this my client service. I'll make it basic, and I'll just enable this like so. I'll give it a topic, give it a URL. Neuron is its own service host. Right, and I'll call it my service for now. Fantastic. Hit apply and hit save. So basically I created a service, but without the WSDL. Remember how I said the WSDL configuration was a bit confusing for folks. Hence, if I put this URL in here, what do I have? I have a service hosted by Neuron, but there's no WSDL. So now if I want to, I can simply add the metadata. We simplified this, less confusing for folks, far less confusing. And now I can just hit apply and save. Now give it just a second or two, and I could refresh this, and next thing I know, I have WSDL for my endpoint. Right? So again, we wanted to simplify the process, important to us. All right, so let me bring that back. The other thing we wanted to do was streamline lots of security. So in credentials, you know, whether you're doing exchange, domain, right? Certificates, now there's an actual certificate browser. Everything is actually built on this. We search and dynamically grab this at runtime. Kind of nice. Access control lists are all fed actually from the credentials. They weren't before. So we fixed up a lot of the things when it came to how we did security within this. On the MSMQ management, kind of nice, right? You can actually see all the topics, the publishers, subscribers. In other words, with Neuron, we're fairly unique. We have hierarchical topic-based pub/sub that we can use to abstract endpoints. Now, as an architect, you have the choice when you're messaging to say, hey, you know what? I want to choose a different protocol for the underlying transport. Maybe I want durability in transactions, like CDC-style transactions. I could choose MSMQ. Maybe I just want durability, and maybe that mirrored type clustering with RabbitMQ. Or maybe I want TCP, or maybe I want named pipes. The idea is, as an architect, you have a choice. But say if you were doing something like MSMQ, well, then here you could actually manage all the underlying queues and see what messages are pending to be delivered. So we cleaned this up a little bit. You could always go ahead and run a message real quick, use one of our test clients. I can actually connect to the bus pretty easily. I'll connect to an existing publisher. I'll just go ahead and send any message. You don't have to compile assemblies or anything like that before you send a message, but I'll send it, and hence I can see here, hey, there's a pending message to be delivered when this guy connects. I can view the message. I can see all the properties. I can obviously edit that message, save it back in, and hence, message is still in there, but now if I view it, it has a new edited message. Kind of nice, and from here I can always republish to any endpoint, do whatever I'd like. So in MSMQ, we tried to clean up, and then even auditing of existing messages. So you have failed messages as well as message tracking. I can go ahead and let's do this. Try that. Well, I'm not connected to our VPN. We'll just connect and correct that very quickly. There we are. Outstanding. And let's run this. I'm assuming everybody can still see me. And now you can just click on the background and hence just navigate through all the different messages. And again, you can republish from here. Fantastic. Okay. And I'm assuming everybody can still see me. Just double check. Audio connection restored. Great. And everybody is there. Outstanding. A little afraid there when you VPN, you might lose something. Okay, so very important for us on the usability side. So usability was with everything, even with our process designer, which we'll go into soon, but even the process designer didn't size appropriately at 125. All this has changed now, which is kind of nice. So scalability and performance. What else did we do? Well, we did a lot of things. We're finding more and more customers are defining more and more endpoints within Neuron. Services were spinning up, adapter endpoints were spinning up. And we were doing this in a serial fashion before the release of 3.1. So if someone had several hundred endpoints to find, it could take a few minutes to actually start this up. Now it really doesn't matter. Obviously it does matter to some degree, but it doesn't matter too much now. You have several hundred endpoints. You'll actually start up and shut down in under a minute, which is kind of nice, right? So especially in people who are working in resource-constrained environments, this is actually a nice little startup. Also, too, we moved our performance counter creation into the setup program. So now when you're running setup, you can actually choose to create the performance counters. It's actually a feature item. What we found is on some operating systems, depending on how they were configured, this could at times be, take 10 minutes. There's just certain bugs within the Microsoft code set itself in the .NET framework where deadlocks could occur. So we moved this in the setup program to eliminate those. We were actually creating these, checking and creating these every time we started up the system. So that could add the time. Now, we did a lot of things with RabbitMQ. So one of the things that we decided to do was support clustering, right? Duplicate detection, a lot of these things. And they kind of go hand in hand. Supporting RabbitMQ clustering isn't as simple as I would like. I think if you go to the site, they say, well, you can just use an IP load balancer, and then when you start looking at all the blogs and the message boards, that doesn't really work too well. Basically, when you start dealing with whether it's RabbitMQ or ActiveMQ, a lot of these open source queuing technologies, they don't really support, say, resource transaction managers. So, there's a lot of onus left on the consumer as well as the producer on how you make reliable connections to, quote, the queuing servers, right? So really, we have to go ahead and manage the, do we reliably send the message? If not, resend that message, right? Handle and manage ACKs and NACKs. And on the subscriber side, none of these guys actually guaranteed once-only delivery, so you actually have to guarantee that once-only delivery. So there was a lot of work done with supporting clustered environments, and I'm actually going to show you that. With ActiveMQ, we ran into very similar issues. We also wanted to figure out how much of a network can we saturate with ActiveMQ. So we refactored our adapter to support multiple threads, multiple consumers, multiple producer model, so that we can really make the most in very low I/O environments, right? So the minute you get into cloud environments, generally, sometimes you're getting maybe, 10% the I/O that you would expect to get, right? Unfortunately, it tends to be more common than not. So can we saturate the network and get the most bang out of our buck on the I/O side? So we did a lot of work with ActiveMQ. With MSMQ, we've always supported MSMQ, and we've got some pretty great support with that. But, more people want to do request response type scenarios with queuing protocols. And natively, they're not necessarily that great at that, right? They're really more for like one-way multicast type messaging. Now, having said that, we want to make transports kind of an invisible thing to our customers. In other words, as an architect, you should be able to select a transport that makes sense for the business scenario. But how you use a Neuron topic in publisher and subscriber should be similar no matter what transport you use. So we really want to make that a first-class experience. So one of the limitations we always had, certainly with the queuing transports for topics, is that you really couldn't have multiple instances of publishers and doing request response, because there was really no guarantee that that instance of the publisher, that single publisher, could actually get the right response back, because they're all feeding off the underlying queues. Well, we changed this with 3.1. In fact, we just added that in, I think about a week ago, so kind of like a little post 3.1, where now you can actually have multiple instances of publishers and subscribers doing request response. Now, what you get from that is some really interesting load balancing. And I'll show you that as well. So with RabbitMQ, there's obviously a new user interface for adding clusters, right? So in other words, if we want to support clustered RabbitMQ servers, one of the things you want to do is add all the servers in the cluster. Maybe you have a master and a slave, add them both, define them to your deployment group, and we'll use those, and we'll connect. And the beauty of how we implemented this is that it's seamless. In other words, you can send and send. A cluster could go down, a node in that cluster could go down, and there's no hiccups. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. I have a couple of test clients up. We ship test clients to make testing Neuron really easy for developers. So hence, I've got a publisher and a subscriber. I'm connected to this topic, RabbitMQ. And if we look at how this topic is configured, fairly easy here. RabbitMQ, there we go. On the networking side, far more properties than we had last time, right? You can determine whether it's recoverable or not, in other words, durable messaging. What style of RabbitMQ transactions would you like? And also, too, remember what I said, these brokers don't guarantee one-to-one delivery, so we have to manage that effectively. So you can actually detect duplicates, turn that on for us. You can determine the window, whether you want duplicates reported or not, and also, too, unacknowledged messages resubmitted to make sure that you don't lose anything. When you're doing a publish-confirm model, underneath the covers, a lot of these folks are doing basically asynchronous ACKs and ACKs, right? And so we're managing, how we're managing those ACKs and ACKs and determining whether messages should be resubmitted or not. Well, when you're failing over clusters, you're not going to get ACKs and ACKs back from a lot of these messages, so these things really need to be resubmitted once you've got connectivity back. So we've done a lot of work with RabbitMQ in that regard. So notice, well, let me actually bring this back up fairly quickly. Deployment groups, under RabbitMQ, I've got 2 clusters defined, 75 and 73. I'm currently connected, right? Endpoint health. I can see I'm currently connected. All right, we ran some through already. I have a PowerShell script here, right, where this is what I'm using to actually, I can stop and start different clusters, different nodes in that cluster. Fantastic. So I can send some, and you'll be able to see the rates on the bottom, and you'll be able to see that, what happens. So I've got a test here, and I'll just go ahead and start sending messages. And we can see I'm sending some messages. I'm using this publisher confirm. My batch size is actually rather small. That's one of the reasons why performance isn't necessarily that great. But the minute you cluster RabbitMQ and you mirror all the queues, that's exactly what I'm doing. You're always going to take a 40-50% hit on that, right? It's just the trade-off that you get. You don't have to use Windows clustering, but there's a trade-off with clustering and mirroring with RabbitMQ. So I've got this. So let me shut down one of the nodes. I'll say I'll shut down number 3. Great. So we're stopping that, and there we go. And notice there was a slight pause, and now messages are just being resent again, right? So no message loss, just going through. I'll go ahead and start node 3 again. Great. So when we stopped on node 3, it flipped over and started sending on node 2. Now I'll just go ahead and stop node 2. Great, it stopped. And notice it's just sending back again, right? And I'll just restart it. So RabbitMQ, interesting way for high availability. You can get high availability with MSMQ, obviously, by clustering it, physically clustering it. The nice thing with RabbitMQ, having these kind of clustered nodes, a slave or obviously the master could go down, and as long as one node is up, we seamlessly send and don't lose messages and detect duplicates, and kind of very nice, right? So we did a lot of work there. Let me shift this down. Anyhow, a lot of work with RabbitMQ. Now the other thing we did, obviously, was with MSMQ. Remember what I said? Multiple instances of publishers and subscribers. Very cool. So I'll bring up a couple of instances. This is really simple. Here is a subscriber. I'll bring up a couple of instances of subscribers. The beauty with multiple instances of request reply with MSMQ, and we're going to end up doing the same with RabbitMQ here, is that you get a natural load balancing across all your Neuron servers, right? And it really is almost evenly balanced. It's kind of nice. Let me bring up another one, and I'll show you the source code for this in just a second. There we go. If I take a look at the source code, On the publisher side, I'm just, again, Neuron ESB, as some folks don't know, we actually have a client API that you can distribute. You can host in your own .NET applications. In this case, I'm hosting the client API in a console app. I'm actually just creating the party. I'm connecting to the bus. And in this case, I'm just using parallel task library, and I'm just going to send in 500 request response. And I want to make sure, obviously, I'm getting the right response back for the message I sent. So hence, I'll write if it's a failure or not. And on the subscriber side, it's the same thing. I'm just creating a subscriber object, wiring in the onReceive event, and that onReceive event is basically going to print out the message. And I can actually cast it into its type. If I look here, if it's a request, I'm just going to go ahead and send back a response this way. All right, and first I'm going to print it out, and I can actually print it out based on type. So very simple to do. Here is a subscriber. Again, they're using the exact same subscriber, using the exact same publisher. To activate this, just hit enter, and all of a sudden, that's it, right? Everything's a success, 500 request response, everything's evenly load balanced. Again, our goal was enabling a lot of different scale and performance scenarios. And I hope that makes sense for folks. We're always striving to be better. Now, connectivity, I've always said it, right? Connectivity is key for an integration server. Whether you're doing application or service integration, we have a service broker, obviously, for doing the service integration, but in many cases, we have customers using our product to use, and they use our adapters as bridges to the bus, right? They'll use our adapters to go ahead and connect the back-end systems, and maybe that's the mainframe using MQ series or ODBC adapter or FTP or whatever adapter that we ship, and then they might expose that as a web service using our service broker kind of thing, right? So either way, your connectivity, you're connecting the systems. Now, connectivity is key, and hence, managing your workforce, that's kind of big nowadays, whether you're using Salesforce or NetSuite or Dynamics. So we wanted to start shipping the adapters for these. Our NetSuite adapter is almost ready. We're shipping that in another week or so. But we shipped with 3.1 the Salesforce adapter as well as a new adapter for Dynamics CRM. Now, what's unique about these adapters and something that we're doing more and more of, and that is what we call metadata harvesting. In other words, for these, you can actually generate not just schemas, right? If you're a developer, you tend to work with schemas because you want to validate, but we also can generate sample messages. The biggest challenge with developers is they might not understand schema, right? A lot of them don't like to necessarily work with schema, but they get an XML message, right? And being able to just generate sample messages where they can just do some swapping and replacing, that's very valuable. So we built message generation into both the Salesforce adapter as well as the CRM adapter, and we're building it right in the NetSuite adapter. And how these things work, very, very, very simple, right? Again, adapters are just bridges to the bus. So if I go back in here and I say, hey, I have this adapter endpoint, just like this, Salesforce. And if I look at the properties, Salesforce is kind of unique. We can actually not just query and insert things in the Salesforce, we can also receive events directly from Salesforce, right? So you can actually configure outbound events on Salesforce to publish directly into Neuron, which is pretty cool. And hence you can actually define a routing table for this. You might say, great, here we go. Here is an outbound event. Let's see here. This is, I think, querying Salesforce. Great. Here are the outbound messages I have defined on Salesforce. And now I can actually map those to specific topics. Kind of nice. Now, if I was doing queries or some sort of generation, I could go ahead and say, great, I could look at all the objects and say, here's an account. Maybe I want to create an account. I'll add it. Here we go. I'll import. We've done a lot of work when it comes to schema generation. When we looked at like Salesforce, what we really tried to do was simplify schemas. There are a lot of embeddings and stuff like that, so we wanted this very easy and simple to work with. So now I can actually import these things as well as sample messages. And these things will just import directly into our repository. So now if I go to our repository, I can see the account creation schema, just like that. And I can also see sample messages for creating an account, right? Right-click, format. There we go. Pretty easy to do. right? And the CRM adapter does something very similar. If I wanted to test this out, here's a sample query message. I could go ahead now and open a test client, hook into the publisher, and the Salesforce adapter is hooking on to the subscriber. And notice I have here as a transport. It could be any transport, doesn't matter. I'll put a query message in. I'll make this a request. I'll send it. And now I get a response back directly from Salesforce, right? All the information that I would expect. Pretty easy to do this kind of thing. Now with Dynamic CRM, we really tried to simplify this. The challenge with Dynamic CRM is we had to build our own serializer. And the reason for that was, well, how Microsoft decided to expose CRM was through data contracts. They're entities through data contracts. So the data contracts themselves are not XML serializable. Unfortunately, the data contracts themselves, you really can't do anything with them, right? You really can't work with them too well. You can't map with them. They're really quite a mess. So we created an XML format that's fairly easy to work with, that can actually do, linked lookups and a lot of great things. So we tried to simplify a lot of dynamic CRM. In fact, we ship an entire sample with this. So if I go into, let me just bring up another instance real quick. And I'll just say, well, let's go ahead and I'll just do this. I'll go to samples and I'll say dynamic CRM. Fantastic. I'll open and I'll just open the sample. And you can see the sample. You can see in the repository all the sample documents. If I wanted to save in a CRM record, we can run just simply fetch XML statements with lookups. So fairly easy to work with, fairly easy to map, right? Again, we wanted something far more functional and easy to use. So again, a lot of work on the connectivity side. We wanted to make this first class easy. And with the sample message generation, take the guesswork out of that kind of integration. Now, the big thing that we did was developer productivity. In this case, this is truly some of the most exciting stuff that we've done. And no one's doing this on the Microsoft platform. I mean, we literally built out not just new management features and, whether they're new process steps, being able to time box, say some processes that you have to make sure, hey, they're dead after 60 seconds or they're dead after 3 minutes, isolating the system with those. We added entirely new language support. We always had language support for just C#. And now you can actually create your own classes in C# and use JavaScript directly in the process designer as well as VB.NET. And we'll show you what that experience is like. It's pretty fantastic. But we wanted to introduce more management features. As we saw people doing more complex things, we found, hey, you know what? We've got to have a better way of managing processes, being able to do code reviews, or just being able to document these processes, navigation, being able to see multiple instances of processes as well as the language designers become very, very important. Too much navigation was going on. So as you can see, like some of the new language support, we have designers for JavaScript, for writing entire C# classes, as well as VB.NET we added. And notice you can set breakpoints. So some of the other cool things that we did, real-time debugging. So we actually built a kind of Visual Studio.NET style debugger. You can set breakpoints on individual process steps. You can set breakpoints within code steps. And you can, as a .NET guy, you can just simply hit the debugger window, run the test, and literally F5, F11 through your steps. And you can inspect the variables. You can inspect the state, see it. One of the things that we're adding post 3.1 is something similar to the immediate window, right, where you can actually go ahead and modify things as you're debugging. And we also enabled some other steps. So previously, you really couldn't test audit steps and publish steps. And there was no way to disable process steps. So it was really sometimes hard to debug, right? So we changed all that. You can actually test auditing and publish steps right in the designer now, and you can disable process steps, right? And those process steps will not run either in design time or runtime, which is kind of nice. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of this. Again, great experience, great things. I'll close this window. Let me get back into here. Excellent. So in the process designer itself, let's expand this out a little bit. So one of the first things you're going to see when you get into this is, number one, I have folders now, right? Kind of cool. I have folders, and I can create folders within folders, right? New set of samples. Great. And hence I can go ahead and drag things directly into folders, and I can manage them from there. Also on these, I can add categories like collection integration, just like I can on every other thing. If I go into messaging, topics, accounts, notice I have collection integration. If I filter here, I'm only going to see collection integration, right? Almost like an application function. And hence, if I go back to processes, I'm only going to see the process with collection integration. All right. So the idea is you can give description, properties, noun, this. And, if you wanted to do any kind of like documentation or reviews with your team, you could go ahead and say, great, let's print this out and see what it looks like. Not only will it print out the image for you, but you'll actually get if there's any custom process steps with code like Java, VB.NET, C#. Notice what it'll do. It'll actually give you great category, your description will be up here, any kind of decision stuff will be here, but as well as all your code steps and the documentation for your code steps, right, in a nice formatted way. And you can save these as images as well. So one of the things that we want to do productivity-wise is, hey, I might need to copy and paste and work between multiple processes. Before, you could only have one process open in Designer at any one time. Well, that's changed, right? I can just go ahead, I can keep on flipping these things open, and notice I can have multiple processes open in tabbed windows all the time. In fact, I can move these tabs around, right? There's no reason why I can't do something just like that and say, great, well, here's one process, here's another process. Right? So I can do a lot of really cool things. Some other things I can do too is I can navigate. If I go ahead and say, great, let me go into this. Notice my pattern here. I have some breakpoints, but I'm going to validate, translate, maybe rethrow. And here I'm actually calling a sub-process. And basically it's my exception handler. And I can double-click on it and go right to that sub-process and hit the back button, go back to the main process. Again, just as you'd expect. So a lot of usability features we try to build into this. On the order side, when it comes to say, hey, if I wanted to write some VB.NET code, and yes, there are some folks still using VB.NET, I can open this up into its own editor. You can see our bars expanded. You can obviously add references to assemblies if you'd like. This is full .NET IntelliSense, right? So you have that in there. Let's see here, right? Full .NET IntelliSense. Add line numbers if you like, compile errors, and again, you can even set breakpoints. So if you wanted to do real .NET debugging, kind of cool. And if you want JavaScript, great, guess what? You can write JavaScript. All this works. And again, on the C# side, you can just write typical C#, what you could always do, and you can also write entire classes. So how does all this debugging work? It works pretty well, quite frankly. Let's go ahead and say I want to close all but this. Hit no. I can close this back out. Let's go ahead and emit some environmental variables. Here I have a typical steps. I'll put a breakpoint on this. This is a C# class. And notice here I can create my own class. And look at this. I can actually go ahead and set a breakpoint here if I want to. Call it my own namespace. And this way I can actually put using statements here and just make things a lot easier to do. All right, great. Now notice I can also right-click and say I want to disable this step. I want to add a breakpoint. I could disable that, right? In this case, I have a breakpoint. I can remove it. I could add it and cancel. I don't think I need to cancel, so I'll go ahead and remove that. And I can test this now. Start. And I'll just load up the environmental variables, just like so. Run it. So we're loading a lot of symbols in the background when this first starts, so this always takes it's going to take a few seconds to start up, but notice this jumped right to the breakpoint I had. And notice I can see my variables that I defined. Pretty cool. I'm just going to hit F5. This is in a loop, and I have lots of different environmental variables in here. And notice this is changing here. Right? So again, I can just keep on hitting F5, loop through it, and now it's going to go down to the next class. Again, I'm just hitting F5. All the values are changing. And now I am, let me bring this down. This is still writing out the tracing, but I'm on this trace step. And I can see the context. I can see the environmental variables still, and I can see the data. So I can see all of these kind of properties that are important to me, right? So lots of things here. I can go ahead and stop this if I'd like. If I want, I can also inspect custom properties. There's no reason why you can't. Here's a sample process that does unzipping. So I've got an unzip here. I'm going to set up an iteration, loop through, and notice this is a custom object. So I can go ahead and say, great, let me load up a binary file. And I happen to have a binary file that's a zip file. This zip file contains lots of other files, right? Zip, here's a binary, I'll submit it. Give this a second to load. Perfect. So notice it stopped on the first breakpoint. And now if I go ahead, I'll just hit F5. It'll go down to the breakpoint I set up in this code step. Notice the file name, so I can actually inspect the file. This is one of the first files that got unzipped. Just go ahead and do that. Great. And now we're on the next file, and so forth and so on. Right? So lots of cool things that you can do. Again, our goal was, how do we make developers more effective at writing quality processes? And really what really can be was being able to open a lot of these things in multiple windows, being able to disable, copy, paste back and forth, but also adding real-time .NET debugging. So we're certainly going to extend this moving forward. We also organized a lot of these process steps. Right? So you can see, obviously, the new language support here, C#, C# class, JavaScript, VB.NET. And remember what I said, you can also test things like auditing. In fact, let's just do that real quick. I have this, let's see here, I have a sample veto, right? Great. This is going to call into this and actually audit the failure. We added some goodies here. So let's go here, schema. I'll do something else too. Remember how I said that publish step didn't work at design time? Well, now it works. Let's go ahead and do a publish, my first step. I'll go ahead, set this to, say, Irvine. Perfect. And what I'll do is I will bring up test client. Sure. Save all this good stuff. And as a test client, I am going to subscribe to Irvine. Receive a message in real time. I'm going to just shrink this a little bit, bring this over, move this over, see some visibility here, and let's see what I'll do. I'll just go ahead and submit a message. And now these the message window is actually pretty intelligent. If you actually navigate out and back in, go to maybe topics or whatnot, and come back in on this process, it'll actually remember your settings, whatever you set last in this window. So your source ID, I'll set for Irvine Pub and Irvine. So underneath the covers, we'll just create a context for this. And I'll say, great, this is going to be a failure, right? It's going to go down, it's going to publish. Notice I just got the message, and hence failure occurred auditing. So hence, what do we have? Publish works at design time now, and if I go into activity, I actually have a failure. Notice that. So here we go. There's a failed message. Notice something else as well. Before we actually shipped this exception pattern, told you to do a lot of work augmenting the message and finding out what that kind of inner exception was. We do that for you now. There is no augmenting of the exception message. We tell you what that parent process is, what the source process that caused the error was, and what the source process step was, as well as what the true exception was. So you don't have to really dig deep, dig down. You don't have to find a lot of this information yourself. We do it all in the audit step now. Again, our goal was to simplify a lot of these things. Let's see here. Going back into processes. So that was really what I wanted to show everyone. I thought we did some fantastic work. I don't know of anyone else shipping a .NET debugger with their integration stack to be able to do real design time debugging when you're creating processes. Again, these are features that are going to grow over time. We really want this experience to be a fantastic one and a very productive one for .NET developers. There's a lot of things on our backlog for an April release, so you want to stay tuned for that. And I guess, without further ado, are there any questions?
Yes, thank you for that presentation, Marty. This brings us to the Q&A portion of today's webinar, and I'll go ahead and start asking the questions in the order they were received. Is there now a way to see dependencies of a given subtopic? Is the first question.
Dependency of a given subtopic. So in Neuron today, you could always see dependencies insofar as if I'm on a topic, I could see everything that's referring to that topic. Now, you can have subtopics, okay? But we don't actually have anything to view specifically who's seeing a subtopic, right? Who could be subscribing to that, whether it's a star subscription or a hard subscription to that topic. I guess it wouldn't be a bad feature. There's no reason why we couldn't add another column in here to give you the specific subscription against it. Never got that request before, but there's no reason why we can't add it. Dependency of a given subtopic. Yeah, I like it though.
All right, thank you, Marty. The second question is, for the multi-MSMQ instance sample, do you need to know the receiver party ID in the publisher?
Nope. No. There just has to be a subscriber for that request. Just within Neuron ESB today, how that works, if you create a topic and you create a publisher and subscriber, somebody's going to publish to that topic or subtopic, you just have to have a subscriber listening to that topic or subtopic that's capable of sending back a reply on that request. But there's no reason, there's absolutely no reason why a subscriber should know who the publisher is and vice versa, right? That's abstracted by the PubSub system itself.
Great, thank you. The next question is, are there any plans for support of Windows Server Service Bus?
So we support that today. We actually ship an adapter. Let's see here. If you go into connections, adapter registration, so Azure Service Bus adapter, we ship that today if you create an adapter endpoint. So you can bridge the bus with Azure. I'll go ahead and Azure. You can either publish or subscribe. And doing that, lots of different options here, right? So I'll just expand a lot of those properties. The namespace, you can pick whether it's a queue or a topic, channel type, retry, back off. There's a lot of kind of crazy stuff that you have to do in the client code too to reliably submit and get things from Azure, right? So we have all that kind of built in. We can obviously monitor those queues or polls, or hence you can actually go ahead and send things out. Yeah, so we already have built-in support for Azure Service Bus. Not for powering, say, not as an option for our topic, but certainly from an adapter perspective, we have that.
Great, thank you. Next question is, has any performance metrics been done with this version of RabbitMQ, specifically around transactional and durable messaging?
Transactional and durable messaging, we haven't done specific metrics. As I said, we have observed, though, that RabbitMQ is always going to be slower than MSMQ. That just seems to be the case. It's not nearly as fast. Let's see here. And we know RabbitMQ, the minute you cluster and you mirror queues, right? If you want that high availability option, I mean, it is nice that you do have the high availability, but we do see like a good 40 to 50% performance hit. and it always depends on what level of reliability you want, right? So, and we built those in. If you go to topics, do you want it durable or not, right? That's the first thing. If you don't want durable, then basically, you lose all your transaction options. But if you want durable, then you have, this kind of publisher confirm option, which is, think of it as kind of like an async ACK-NACK type option. And you can obviously increase this. By default, I think Rabbit does 0. Although it speeds it up quite a bit, 0 is also not necessarily a smart idea. It really depends. I mean, it could be, right? But usually it's not. You have to look at sustainable throughput, right? Can your subscribers handle the load that your publisher is sending, vice versa, right? Let's see here. If you need duplicate detection because you want that high availability option and you don't want duplicate messages, you can do that or build in your own. And obviously, detecting duplicates has its own impact. The challenge I've always had with a lot of the open source queuing things is that it really forces the clients to write a lot of compensating code to get that same level of reliable expectation, right, that you would expect, that you already get something, that you already get with more commercial queuing products. So that's been our experience. We haven't done any real hard numbers, though. I've gotten at least, with the publisher confirm model, I think I've gotten maybe, I think I've gotten up to something like, I think I've gotten around maybe 1,500 if it's not clustered at all. Less if you're using transactions. Transactions tend to be really slow. Publisher confirms are a lot faster just because you can bump this up a lot, this batch size. And there's trade-offs with all these settings. So you really have to look at, what their business requirements are.
All right, thank you, Marty. Next question is, are there any plans for Siebel CRM?
Well, Siebel CRM today actually exposes itself via web services, but I think, there might be something where we actually go ahead and do something similar that we did with Dynamic CRM, right? Like Dynamic CRM exposes a set of web services, but they just happen to be not very useful. Their format doesn't make them very useful for integration, right? It's only useful if you're basically writing code against the API kind of thing, right? But if you're trying to do integration and trying to make integration easy with XML messaging, it's kind of terrible to work with. On the Siebel side, they've always exposed a set of services, and obviously we can call those with our service broker. It might be advantageous for us to maybe build in that metadata harvesting wizard. Surprisingly, now that we've got that capability done, and we've done it with 2, building adapters that support that, it's actually not that hard for us to do. Hence, that's why we're knocking out the NetSuite adapter in another week or 2. Following that, we're probably going to do SAP next. I think Siebel and Oracle are also going to be on our hit list, right? I think those are common ones. We'll have to take a look at the Siebel format, though. I think Siebel went away from using an API a long time ago, right? They just moved to web services. And Siebel is an interesting animal. At least years ago when I integrated with it, it just, it couldn't support, it was interesting. It just couldn't support a high subscription rate to its server. But I'm sure that's changed now, right? That was a long time ago.
All right. Our next question is, are processes or custom classes stored as files and thus can be put under version control?
Yes. In fact, every entity within Neuron, when you configure a runtime environment, you're configuring it to look at a directory. And hence, every entity, whether it is a topic, a publisher, subscriber, a condition, right, a saved, basically content-based routing description, whether it's a transform, whether it is an adapter or service endpoint, a policy, even a process. All of these are actually stored as, let me go in here, under, let's see here, solutions, and let's go in demo solutions. All of these are stored as, if I look at processes, they're all stored as sample XML documents, not samples, but XML documents. Here's the audit process, just like you'd see here. Here is the in account, in account, in account, in account. Those are all there. If I look at topics, here we go. All my topics are there, and hence if I go back in here, all my topics. Right, so we store everything as an individual XML document. Now what's nice about this is that you can put all this, the entire directory, on the source control, which also means that individual developers can also check these things in, check these things out. So now you actually have the prospect of multiple developers working on the same solution. You also have an interesting, interesting scenarios where, deployment becomes incredibly easy, right? In other words, you can make your changes, and you could obviously just use, GitHub or KFS, whatever your poison is, and just download it to your QA or production box, all the latest, and hence you've deployed. But you can also do incremental deployments, right? You may very well want different people developing different pieces or, of your solution on their own laptops, on their own configuration. And then literally you could, in some cases, you can actually just take these things, copy and paste them to your production server. The Neuron runtime will automatically detect changes, pick those up, and load those changes, right? So it's that easy. You can also use our command line tool to deploy the incremental changes if you want. And you can also just use file and say, hey, I want to export out n number of things, right, into a package, and then you can import that package into, say, your production box. So we've really made deployment incredibly easy. And part of what makes deployment easy as well is the fact that you can define these environmental variables. And notice you might have different values for this variable, but you can use this variable to configure any process step, any service endpoint, connection endpoint. Notice this address is localhost because I'm working on the development group, but under bindings, it's using that environmental variable. If I hit Control Space now, you'll get a list of all the environmental variables that are valid for this. So hence, if I go ahead and say, this is localhost private, if I go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to run this server under the QA environment now, I'll just go ahead and restart that. Great. And then I'll reconnect. Great. So notice service endpoint says localhost private. If I go ahead and reload this, connect, service endpoint, notice it says MSMQ underscore QA1, right? It's using the value for that environmental variables. Kind of nice. So you can do that whether it's with a service endpoint, an adapter endpoint, same thing. Almost every property is exposed with this, right? Control Space, bring it up. Or even if I'm in a process, I could do something like, great, here's my transform schema, there's this bindings, you've got the same thing, right? There we go. You can also retrieve the value of these at runtime within a C# code step, right? So all this stuff is available to you. We have customers that use our environmental variables literally to retrieve values at runtime within a code step within a process.
All right, thank you, Marty. And this brings us to the close of our webinar today. If you did ask a question and we didn't have time to answer it live on air, we will make sure to follow up with an email response for you. Please feel free to go to neuronesb.com to download the latest version and to test drive all the features that you saw today. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day for joining us. You are now free to disconnect. Thank you.